All right, good afternoon. I wanted to just do a demo video of this week's lab. So let me go ahead and share my screen. And I'll share this screen here. And this week's lab, of course, is under Lab 5. And then you can open the file here and then you submit it there. That's how we've always done that. But what we're going to do is on our guacamole server, and just as way of reminding you, and these instructions are in the lab, but if you happen to, which a couple of you had this problem last week, when you went to change your IP address, somehow you got onto your guacamole machine. And if you notice, I changed the name of this to do not change. So all of yours say do not change. So if you're ever in the network and security and then the properties for the network connection and you see this do not change, right away that I want that to trigger a thought that I'm not on my virtual machine, I'm on my host machine, my guacamole machine. Okay, so let me log into my server. And what we're going to do this week last week we had these three machines running, right? The Win10 client, Win server router, and the CentOS router. And all of you were able to get your router to work just fine. You can leave those running if you want. Probably the best option would be to power off the Win server router. So I'm going to open this. And another thing that someone had recommended is if you open it in a new window, you're going to have better mouse support, because some of you were having some issues with the mouse where it was, you'd click here and it would show up somewhere else. It wasn't in the right spot. So let's, I'm going to just come into this one and shut it down. And the other thing you'll notice on my background, on my VMs, I change it to a bright color. So that's just another way for me to know if I'm on a black background, that's my host machine. If I'm on a bright colored background, that's one of my virtual machines. So I'm going to come down here. And the other way, again, if I look at my network settings, so if I go into change adapter options, they'll have names that I'm okay with changing: Ethernet 0, Ethernet 1. If it says do not change, here's a good idea: don't change it. Okay, so that way we don't have to run a campus and fix that. All right, so I'm going to shut down Win server, but I'm going to leave the CentOS router running and Win10 client. Okay, so what we need to do this week is we need to build a new Win server -DC. So I'm going to come back into the data store browser. I'll make sure I'm at the root. I'm going to create a new directory, and this is going to be Win server -DC, which is for domain controller. I'm going to create that, and I'm going to go into my parent, Win server parent, and I'm going to copy the VMDK to the Win server DC. And then I'm going to copy the VMX file to the DC as well. Okay. And I'm going to close this and I'm going to wait for this to finish. So the virtual disk is running right here. And while that's copying, let me bring over the lab file itself. All right, so what we're going to do is install Active Directory. And we're going to change the IP address. And this Win server only needs to be on the VM internal network. Okay. So this machine won't have internet access, which is fine. We're not doing anything externally. If you want it to have internet access, just change this gateway to 192.168.100.1, which is our CentOS router's IP address. Okay, just if you need it, which we really don't. So I would recommend you just do it like it is here. Okay, now there's a couple of things here that, again, I'm not really giving you the steps on how to do this, but I'll show you how to do this. And one of the first things we need to do once we have this machine set up is change the NetBIOS computer name to server. So let me come back over here, and that's still copying. So I'm going to let that go just for a little bit. So let's just kind of get a lay of the land here. We're going to install Active Directory. We're going to give it the domain name of cnet.lab. We can give it the password as always. And then we're going to log in. Once Active Directory is installed, we're going to install DHCP. We're going to give it create a new scope called clients. And we're going to give out IP addresses from 192.168.100.100 to 100.150. And we're going to leave the exclusions and delay blank, set the lease duration to 3 hours. Yes, and we'll walk through this in just a second. And here it says gateway of 100.2. That's good. That's because eventually we're going to use the Win server dash router. Today I'm just doing the CentOS router. So we'll just leave this as is and not worry about internet connectivity. Okay, and then we're going to create some users, and then we're going to create a file share, and then we're going to use Windows 10 to test it. So we should be able to do that, and then there's a couple of review questions. All right, so let me move this back over here. Let's see. This is taking a while. And while I'm on here, I'm just going to check the settings on Win 10-Client 1. And I'm going to edit these settings and make sure the network's on my internal network. That's where I want it. That's perfect right there. And then I'm going to open a new window. Okay, and I'm going to log in here. Changes. Come on. There we go. Again, this is a little bit slow, so let's. CNET 2021. And notice the bright color, just so we know that. And right here, if you don't get internet connectivity, that's okay. But let's just double check this machine. And notice how my mouse is all kind of off here. And it's trying to open up stuff that I didn't click on that. So this isn't letting me close it. If your mouse gets kind of squirrely like this, right? So like I'm way over here, but that's the close button. So what you can do is just refresh your Windows, and normally that will put your mouse in the right spot. So it's still way off. So if that's the case, just close it. And let's try this open browser console. That's the one. Yeah, this is the one, the open browser console. See, and then that keeps it inside of your area here. So now your mouse is going to be much more usable. So I'm just going to come into my Ethernet adapter and make sure I'm set to obtain automatically. And I'm going to get rid of that DNS setting that I had in there last week. So we don't need that. We need this to get the DNS from our domain server. Okay, so let's do that. And until we bring up that server, we're not going to get an address. We're going to get a PIPA address, which is the automatic private IP address. So if I come into IP config, it's got an IP from my router, but if I release this and then renew it, it's going to time out and I'll get a PIPA address. Okay, so that's there. I'm going to shrink that. So now it's just down here in the corner. And let's go take a look back at our router. And it looks like the copy and the disks are done just fine. So now let's go back into the data store. And we're going to go into the WinServer-DC. We're going to right click on the VMX file, register VM. Then we're going to close this. And then we'll see here that this WinServer parent is here, but we want to rename this. So I can come in here, rename, and this is going to be my domain controller. Okay. And then one last thing I want to do is make sure it's on the internal network. That's all I needed on this week. I don't need 2 network cards. I just need 1 network adapter, VM internal, save that. And now I can power this on. I copied it. And then I'm going to open a new console. So really, these are the 2 machines I need, the WinServer-DC and then my Windows client machine. And you see this is sitting here. It's not going to get an IP address. It's going to come back with a 169.254.something.something address, which tells me it's not able to communicate with the DHCP server, which makes sense because this machine here, my server, is going to be my DC, my domain controller with DHCP, and it's not configured yet. So of course that all makes sense to us. All right, so let's let our server get fired up here. All right, so this is because we sysprep this the week before. Now it's just going to have me answer some basic questions. We'll do a restart. I have to set the administrator password. And all these look good to me. Applying these settings, we accept the license. And then put in our password, which again is the same one we've been using for everything, the CNET 2021 exclamation point. Finish that. All right, so now we're going to get this started here. So to get the Control Delete, click on Actions, and then guest OS, send keys, control, delete. So that's a little bit different. Doesn't have that down arrow there. And then make sure that has the focus again. And log on. And the first thing we need to do on the top of page 2 is rename the server. So let me show you how you do that on a Windows server. So let us start up, and Server Manager is going to be our best friend here. So we can do a couple of these steps without restarting it, and then we only have to restart it one time. So if we let this run, and we can see it's got that dash that goes across there. If we click on local server, and then you see where the computer names is big, ugly, Win-BTG, blah, blah, blah. We want to change that. So just click on it and then click on change. And here's where we're just going to put server. Okay. And it's going to tell us we need to restart, but we can actually save that for a little bit later. So restart later. And then we want to change the IP address. So again, from this Server Manager local server, if we click on Ethernet 0 IP4 address, we can come in here, right click properties, and then TCP IP version 4. And here we want to put in 192.168.100.3 with the subnet mask of 255.255.255.0. Default gateway, we can leave that blank. And then we'll put in our loopback address, our local loopback for our DNS. And that will make sure that this machine, when we install Active Directory, will work properly. So now I'm going to issue a restart here. I'm just going to right click, shut down, restart, and let that machine restart so that the NetBIOS name is now server. Now our VM's name is still WinServer-DC, but to our clients, when they try to search for it on the network, it'll be server.cnet.lab when we're all said and done. So let's let this restart, and we can pop back over into Windows, and we can see that it did not get an IP address. So we got a 169.254.16.132, which is to be expected because we don't have a DNS or DHCP server. Okay, so let's come back over here. Actions, guest OS, send keys, control delete, and this has to have the focus, CNET 2021. And now we are at the bottom of page 2. All right, so Server Manager is going to open up again. And we'll use Server Manager to, surprise, surprise, manage our server. But let's just double check our local server here and make sure our name change took place. So there it is. Our computer name is server, and our Ethernet adapter is set to the correct IP address. Okay, so then we'll come back over to the dashboard, and we want to add a new role and to install Active Directory. We just go next. It's a role base. We want it to be installed on our machine server. And we want the Active Directory domain services. So this, the domain services require some of these additional tools. We'll click add and click next, next. And then it says you can do it in the cloud. And then we're going to click install. Okay, so this is going to go through the install to get the files in place. and then we'll come back and configure our domain once this is done. All right. And again, so this one machine is going to really have four purposes. It's going to be our domain controller, which means it's going to have Active Directory. It's going to be our DNS server, so it's going to do our name resolution. It's going to be our DHCP server, which will hand out our IP addresses on our network, and it's going to be our file share. So we're going to set up a file share and share files. Okay, so once this is done, there's a little area here that says promote this server to a domain controller. So if we click this, we want to select add a new forest, and we're going to call our domain CNET.lab. Now that is not a registered domain name. .lab is not a routable domain name, so it's only for internal, which is how we would do it in our regular networks. So we're going to do this. It's going to go out and try to look at it and say, okay, let's see if it's here. Okay, the forest functional level, just set the highest level, which is server 2016. And for the password for the directory service restore mode, put in the CNET 21. CNET 2021. And then the rest of this is just next, next, next. So we're not going to use an outside DNS. We're going to use an internal DNS. So we'll let that do its own thing. This is going to verify the name, which should just be server.cnet.lab, I think is what it will come up with. No, just CNET. So the CNET.lab, that makes sense. So then let's go next. For the default database, we're going to leave those in their normal location. And then we're going to click next. It's probably going to give us a couple of warnings here. Something about the cryptography and MT4 DNS delegation. Yeah, so MT4 delegation and so forth. So these are just warnings. These are fine. Can't find a DNS server because we're going to install DNS. So let's go through this. And this is now actually installing the Active Directory domain services onto our machine. So when our clients authenticate, they're going to authenticate against this machine. So whenever we need domain services, we need to make sure this machine is turned on. If this machine is off, our domain won't work. So it's common in some future labs where, when you're working for a couple hours and maybe it times out or goes to sleep or, turns off or whatever it does, to come back and say, hey, this isn't working right. Okay, so this is going to restart. So saying, hey, it's restarting, and we close all this. There, it restarted all by itself. So we'll let that restart. Right. So let's just take just a little bit of time. And now when it starts up, you'll notice the logon is going to be a little bit different in that it's going to have us log on to the domain. Because this is our domain controller, I can only do a domain logon. I can no longer log on to the local machine. So you'll see this here in just now on this machine, isn't going to matter, but when we go to our Windows client and we attach it to the domain, we need to make sure we specify that we're logging on as the correct user. Okay. So once this finishes, so it's applying all of our new policies and the domain policy. So like if you've ever looked at the local security policy on a computer, they say local and then domain. So now this machine is recalibrating all of its settings to the domain settings, because now it's a domain controller. It has a different kind of set of rules that it needs to follow, right? All right, so now it's finished setting up. So I'm gonna go into the send keys, Control Delete. And now you notice it says CNET/administrator. So it went from a local machine to a domain machine. So let's go CNET 2021. And this will launch Server Manager again. So what we're going to do from here is install DHCP. So Active Directory is now on there. Now we're going to add a role and feature, and that's going to be our dynamic host control protocol server, which will hand out our IP addresses for our machines. Now, remember, we typically want our servers to have a static IP address, which this one will at 100.3, which we set up at the very beginning. And we want our clients to get an automatic IP address, which is from DHCP. So I'm going to click Add Roles and Features. Click Next, Next. It's going to be on this machine. And then just come down here to DHCP. Where is the, am I missing it here? Oh, I click features. I need a role, server role, DHCP. So somehow I was on the wrong spot. So it's a DHCP server role. And then we're just going to next, next, next all the way through this. Install. And this doesn't take very long at all to install. Famous last words, right? And then a lot of the slides we've been seeing PowerShell. So if you wanted to know how to do this in PowerShell, you can click on this export configuration. It will show you the XML file on how to do that, which is kind of neat. So you can go through and look at all those. So here I'm at the bottom of, or the middle of page 3 with the DHCP server. Okay, so now I'm going to come into my DHCP tool, which is Tools, DHCP, and I am going to come over here on the right side. Now you might want to make this full screen and then make this a little bit bigger. And then if I right click on IP version 4, or yeah, I can right click, new scope. So what I want to do is add a scope, and it'll go through the wizard. And the name I'm going to give it is clients. The description, you can just say clients as well. The starting IP address is 192.168.100, and it's going to go through 100.150. Okay. The subnet mask, it will automatically give it the correct one because this is a private class C address. So do 255.255.255.0. And I'm going to leave the exclusions blank. The least duration, I want this set to 0 days and 3 hours. Okay. And yes, I want to configure these options now. And the default gateway, we're going to put in our server, our Win server dash router IP address, because that's the one we're going to use later on. And make sure you click add here. And then the domain name and services, the CNET.lab, it already knows that this machine, which is the 192.168.100.3 IP address, is the DNS server. So it already got that. So we just click next on this screen. Then I want to activate the scope. I'm going to click finish, and it will go from there. Okay. And then we click on finish. Now, if this is if this stays red, that means it's not authorized. So what I have to do is come over here and click on the refresh and let this refresh itself. And then where's properties? Okay, so I have to click on the server and then click authorize. So right click on the server.cnet authorize. And then once that's authorized, the next thing I can do is come over on more actions and restart my DNS server or DHCP, sorry. So watch this, this will turn to green now. So it's just restarting the DHCP service on this machine. And now everything's green. So when that goes green, that means that now if I come back over to my Win 10 client, and I'm going to open a browser, and if I do an IP config here, and then if I do a renew, now this should pick up an IP address from my DHCP server. All right. And that's a good sign. That means it sees a network somewhere. Click yes there. Give this another second. It's still trying to resolve the internet information, which it's not going to, but it will get us an IP address. Right. So we'll let that do its thing there. Let's minimize that guy. Let's go back over to our server. And now we have DHCP set up. Okay. So the next thing we want to do is we need to modify the group policy, the security settings on this machine. So if I right click, start run group policy management console.microsoft console, gpmc.msc, and then I need to open the forest and then the domain, and then go into the CNET.lab. And what I want to do is expand that. And on the default domain policy, I want to right click edit. And from here, I want to go to the computer configuration, policies, Windows settings, and then security settings, and then account logon or account policies. So let's make this just a little bit bigger. And account policies. And then I want to do the password policy. Okay. And on this one, I want to go into this passwords must meet complexity. And I want to change this to disable. So if we set that, we leave it as enabled, it won't like our CNET 2021 exclamation because it has the same name as our domain. So our domain is cnet.lab. The computer password is CNET 2021 exclamation point. So it's not going to like that. So I just disable that, click OK. And then for that to take place, I need to close all this. And then if you open a Windows PowerShell admin, and then just do GP update, and that will do a group policy update, and that will reload that policy into memory. So it's doing the computer policy, and then it does user policy, and then we can close that. And now we can go into our administrative tools, Active Directory domain users and computers. So if we go tools, Active Directory users and computers, this is the main tool that we'll use to create our users. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is create a new organizational unit. So if we go into our CNET.lab, we can just right click anywhere here and do new organizational unit. Another way you can do that is you can click up here where you have new users, new groups, new organizational unit in the current container. So the containers are CNET.lab. And this one we're going to call students. And we'll protect it from accidental deletion, which we can always undo that later. And then within the students OU, we're going to create a new user called CNET. Okay. So the password user first name is CNET, last name doesn't need one. Logon will be CNET. And then if we click next, we're going to use CNET 2021 exclamation point. Exclamation point. We have to uncheck that user must change password at next logon, and then select user cannot change password. Okay, so make sure the user must change password is unchecked, and then the password never expired is checked as well. So we'll just leave that. Now, if you do this and you get an error, which mine is a typing error. But if you get an error that says it can't complete, that means that your group policy change wasn't successful. So go back and go to the top of page 4 and redo the account policies that we changed. Okay, so then it says create 2 user accounts in the student OU. And again, there's a couple ways we can do this. New user. And one is user 1. Same password. Uncheck that, uncheck that. Finish. New user. User 2. uncheck, check, next, next, finish. Okay, so now we have Active Directory users created. And the next thing we want to do is, oh, we have the users. I still need to do the groups. So let me go back into Active Directory users and computers. So now we need to create a domain local security group in the students OU. So now we're going to go right here. We're going to do new group. And we want this to be a domain local security group called DL underscore share. And we're going to do another group, which will be our global group, global security group. And we'll call this GL underscore share. And I'll hit OK. And then in the global group, we're going to add the members of user 1 and user 2. So if I just go user check names, it will say user 1, user 2. I just control click, and now both of those will be added to the global group. And then the domain local group, the DL share, will have a member of GL share. So if I come members, add, and then if I just do GL check names, I'll get the right share. So what this is saying that is in my DL share, I have a group shared, which is the GL share, and then the users are part of the GL share. So if I go member of on the users, I'm in the GL share group. Okay, so that's the way we want to make that the user setup there. And then the next thing I want to do is come into my file system, and in my root of my hard drive, my C drive, I just want to create a new folder. I call it share. And then on share, I'm going to right click properties. And then on sharing, I'm going to click share. And I'm going to share this with the DL, the domain local share. Okay. And we'll leave the administrators read, write, and owner. And then I click share. So now my users in my DL share have read, write permissions. If I come back into property sharing, I want to also add in this the CNET user, but he only is going to get read permissions, or she. Okay, so my administrators, I'll leave those alone. And then I created the DL share, and I want this to be read, write. And then the CNET user is read. Okay, I'm going to click share there and done. So now everything on my server is all done. Okay, so now let's go back over to our Windows machine. And we got an issue here where it got an IP address, but let's just close this for now. And to add this machine to a domain, I can come into settings, and then system, about, and here is where I can add this to a domain. I think this is where I do it. No, that's not it. But if I right click here and then go system, system info. Yeah, so you want to get into the system info. And then here's where it says it's in the work group. I want to click change settings. And then to rename the computer or change its domain, click here. And then for the domain, I'm going to put cnet.lab. And I'm going to hit OK. And it should prompt me with the username and password. So here I want to put in CNET/administrator, CNET 2021. And if this is successful, say welcome to the CNET.lab domain. Okay, so that's all we have to do on that one. And if you get an error on that, check and make sure you're on the 192.168.100.something network, which I am. So if I come into my settings here, I got that first IP address from my DHCP server, 100, right? That was the scope I set. So that means I'm good to go there. If you don't get that, then check and make sure this machine is connected to the right network. So go into the VM settings and make sure this VM internal or internal is selected there. If it's on the other one, it won't work. Okay. So now I'm going to restart this machine. And the other thing you may, if you don't change that DNS from 4.2.2.2 that we had set last week to obtain automatically, that would cause your machine to have problems as well. But now I'm going to log on as user1 at cnet.lab. So you're going to notice now that I'm on a domain, this machine is going to log in a little bit different, right? Because now it's not a standalone machine, it's a domain attached machine. So if I come into actions, guest, send keys, control, delete, it says it wants to log on as the CNET, which is the local user. That's not the one I want. I want this other user, and I'm going to do user1 at cnet.lab. And that will log on to the domain with the user account of user1. Okay. And because it's the first time that user's logged on to the Windows 10 client, it's going to build its profile. And while that's running, we're going to then navigate to the share that we created. And it says it's almost there. Perfect. So then let's come into our network or our file explorer. And in the address bar, just put / server. And if everything's correct, it'll find our share, which it did. So I'm going to go into this folder. And because I'm user1, I have read-write access because user1 is part of the global share. And the global share is part of the domain local share. And the domain local share has read-write permissions. So I'm going to come in here and do user1. And it gave me no problem there. I'm going to do a new text file. And user1. And then in here, I can do whatever I want and save it and close all that. And just for completeness, now let's switch users. So I'm just going to sign out. And then I'm going to sign back in with other user. And this is going to be CNET at cnet.lab. So it's the domain CNET, not the local one. And it will build its profile. And after a few seconds, We're almost there. It will log on. And if I come back into my share on server, now if I try to access the share, I can, but if I want to change this to CNET user was here, if I go to save this, I get a save as because I do not have permissions to save it. So I'll just have to cancel that and don't save. So again, I only have read permissions. I can't come in here and create a new folder. It says you don't have permission, access denied. So that's how we set up our file shares. So then when we're done, just power down our machines. And over here, we can do that. I want to go console and power this one down. And then my router. Come in here. And power this one down. And power off. And of course, when all these are down, make sure all my windows are closed, everything's off, and I'm gonna log off. And that's it. So that's what this week's lab is going to look like. All right. Now, next week, we're going to do something very similar, but we're going to use all CentOS to connect to DHCP and create the file share. Right. Hopefully that will be more than enough. You can always come back to this video to see how I did the lab. And then, of course, we'll be available to do the lab together on Tuesday. All right. Take care.